Thank you for coming this morning. I'll just go through a few housekeeping issues. If you need the toilet, it's to the left, to the right, down the corridor, right at the end. And if we need to exit for whatever reason, it's straight through this door and it'll take us out into the open. All right. As I said in session 1 when we gathered together, I'll repeat it again. If all care staff gave the care that they thought was appropriate, the client would not have consistency in the care they received. And in the case of elders, that would be very dangerous because of their complex needs. What we hope to achieve today is for you as carers to be able to identify, to check, and to monitor the resident's needs by using a care plan. The focus of this session is that you would know your role in providing the care needed for the client by implementing the interventions and actions of the care plan. Do any of you have any understanding, or do you remember anything of what was said about the care plan in the last session? Just a brief comment.
It's important to follow it.
Important, because it's a legal document. That's probably the pivotal and the most important point. At the end, I'll hand out a written assignment, which will have 10 questions. You're to complete all the questions and hand them in by this Friday, the 24th of May, to the office by 4 p.m. I will mark it over the weekend and I'll return it to you. Well, you'll hear by email or telephonically by the end of the working day next week, Wednesday, the 30th of May, to see whether you've received competency. You have to get 8 out of the 10 questions correct. Okay, I'll start off by actually just recapping the first session, just to familiarise ourselves. In the first session, we looked at 4 areas. We looked at what the objective of the care plan was and how a care plan is created. We then looked at how you as a carer plan your activities using these individualised care plans. And then thirdly, we just looked at the relationship that is important and the type of relationship that you need to develop between yourself and the client so that you can effectively implement the care plan. And the fourth point or area we looked at was how you as a carer support the ongoing monitoring of a care plan. Because we're dealing with human beings whose health needs change, especially at the end of life, the care plan will change as a result as well. So we'll look at number 1, what is the objective of a care plan? The objective of a care plan is mainly to actually support the client in maintaining their mobility, their independence and their self-worth or self-well-being as long as possible. It's a client-centered plan, so it's a case of supporting the client in identifying and meeting their needs and their preferences. The next thing we looked at was how is the care plan created? When every resident comes into the aged care facility, they undergo a very comprehensive assessment involving a team of healthcare professionals. This would be your dietitian who would look at food and nutrition. It would be your care manager who is your very senior RN, what they call a level 3 with a lot of managerial experience. She would look at your personal cares. She'd also assist the dietitian, and she would be responsible for documenting toileting and continence. You'd then have your physiotherapist, and he would look at, or she would look at mobility and transfers. And that would be her area of where she has to, or he has to evaluate and document. You'd have your healthcare officer who would look at social history, social interests, and the activities and preferences, and she would document and record all of that information so that she could tailor activities and include that resident in certain activities. You'd then have your ARN or your carer, which is what you are, and you're very front line. You probably do most of the monitoring and most of the ongoing evaluation, and then you have your general RN who does a fair amount of that as well. So that covers the objective and how it's created. We then moved on to the second area, which is how you as a carer would plan your activities using the care plan. The care plan is your guideline. It's created by the organisation that you work for, and it's drawn from legislation and regulations in the Provision of Care Act. So out of this comes your role, out of this comes your responsibilities and your duty of care. It's a legal document, you have to abide by it, and it protects you as well, so that if anything happens to that resident whilst you're engaging and assisting that resident, and you're not following the care plan procedure. I gave you an example with the lady who was actually a tour assist, that sometimes one carer would be assisting her. If something happens to her and they slip or they hurt themselves, if you're not abiding in the care plan, you are open to being charged with neglect or abuse. So it's very, very important to protect yourself and to protect the resident. So the main point that I'd like to make in this section is that not all residents can participate in all the levels of activity equally well. Some have very strong cognitive ability, but they could have some type of paralysis physically or unable to, and there could be a combination of different things. So you follow the care plan, you take your time and you manage your time using the care plan. And I gave the example of the lady in our low care facility who was very able to actually accomplish all her needs independently. She was very cognitive, she could express what she wanted, she had a lot of interest, shower, eat, she could do most things herself. However, she was incontinent and you had to schedule toilet her. She would saturate her continence pads to the point where it would actually wet the furniture as she was sitting on her clothes. So there was no response. For some reason, she actually could not actualize what was happening and even ask for assistance. So you've got somebody who you probably wouldn't expect it, but from looking at the care plan, this is the type of information that you pick up. The third area we looked at was the relationship that is important that you develop, and we mentioned that the relationship between the carer and the client is therapeutic relationship. You have to respect, you mustn't judge, you have to encourage them to express themselves as much as possible, accept their cultural interests, their values, their religious beliefs. And I gave the example of the Mormon lady whose family requested that she not be given coffee because it was against, or tea or cordials because of the caffeine, which was against their religious beliefs. So we have to respect that. We have to honour that. It's not a case of what we think, it's what they have requested, so we have to honour that. Also, as a carer, it's important that you adhere to privacy and confidentiality. As a carer, you're told information on a need-to-know basis in order that you can fulfill your duty of care. And again, I gave another example of a lady who was removed from the aged care facility by her family, and they refused to bring her back. And she eventually was brought back. They asked for her to come back because her behaviour had deteriorated. And she came back in quite a physical, emotional and mental state. But in order to prevent that situation from happening again, and in order for us to ensure that the resident was not put at risk, and for us to perform our duty of care, we had to be told a certain level of information. So we realised the severity of it, and we would not allow it to happen again. So you don't necessarily get to know what entailed at top management or what happened with the police when they got involved. That doesn't affect how we do our job. Again, you also have to respect their interests. You respect what they want to watch on TV, what videos they want to watch. Things like some of the male residents want to wear vests every single day, whether it's freezing cold or blisteringly hot. They've got up every morning and they've been doing it for 40 years and they put on a vest, and even if it's incredibly hot and it doesn't make sense, if that is absolutely what they want, we assist and we give them that. And lastly, they can refuse care. You cannot force them. if they want to refuse care, they can. So that's the third area. The final area we covered in session 1 was how you support the how you support the monitoring of the care plan. Basically, as a carer, or as I said earlier, you are to support in maintaining mobility, independence, and a sense of well-being for as long as possible. Once that care plan has been implemented, you're to observe and monitor that it is actually meeting their identified needs, that no needs are slipping by the wayside and haven't been adequately assessed, and that it is effectively addressing what they need to have done. So how you'd monitor, your chief way as a carer would be to observe. You spend a lot of time observing. You talk to family. You also talk to other carers because we see things. We all notice different things. We've got different strengths and different powers of observation. So you glean from each other. You're a team and you glean. And also different residents respond differently on different shifts. Dementia's behaviour in the morning is very different to in the afternoon. It's just the nature of dementia and how it works. You would also obviously observe and listen to whatever the client says, whether it's verbally or non-verbally. Once you have information, you'd feed it back to your superiors using progress notes, which we'll look at in this session. You would obviously contact your superior telephonically, email, or face-to-face. I mentioned the incident form that you would fill out, and I gave the example of the dementia resident that tackled one of the carers and how she had to document what happened, and that was fed back to the care manager who looked at the situation. And then I mentioned the risk report that one of the carers had to complete because of the resident who kept getting skin tears because of the wheelchair metal handles catching her legs, and how that was documented, given back to the physio, who then had to look at what he was prepared to do to adjust that situation. Okay, so I'll just ask 1 or 2 questions just to see how much you've remembered. What is the objective of a care plan? Just briefly.
To keep the well-being of the resident.
Yeah. To support them and to make sure that they have mobility, independence, and well-being for as long as possible. Can you name 2 of the healthcare professionals that would be involved in putting together the care plan? I mentioned, I think, probably about 5.
RNs.
Anyone else?
The family.
Initially they are, actually, yes. It's very true, they are, because it's a client-centred plan, and they do involve the client and the family. That's very good, especially when it comes to lifestyle. You glean a lot from them in terms of what their interests are, what their past social enjoyments were. That's actually very good. One more.
The carer.
The carer as well. Yeah, we are. We're front line. We don't necessarily have the professional title as such, but they're very, very reliant on us. Okay, now in today's session, we're going to cover 3 areas. We're going to look at the ongoing, how you as a carer will contribute to the ongoing relevance of the care plan. We're going to look at how you respond, or how you respond to situations of risk, because it's a very fine line. And then we'll look at documentation. We'll look at the progress notes briefly, the handover sheet briefly, and I'll just give you a couple of, show you a couple of care plans, summary care plans, just so you've got a bit of a feel of what they are. All right, so first we'll look at how you contribute to the ongoing relevance of a care plan. As I've mentioned quite a few times, it's a legal document. It's reviewed every 3 months generally with most organisations. It's reviewed externally, so it has to be current. If it's not current, it has to be checked and reviewed by an RN and by the care manager, and it has to be signed and dated. If it's not current, it's perceived as being unethical and unsafe, and what could happen is the aged care facility could be sanctioned, which means they would say, up until all your care plans are reviewed and current, you cannot admit any other residents. Because what could happen is you could have an agency carer come in, or you could have one of your regular carers who's been asked to go and work in another lodge that they don't ever really work in, so they don't have a very strong familiarity with the actual residents themselves. So the agency nurse or the unfamiliar carer would walk into the lodge. She would go to your care plans in the nurse's station, and she would pull out. She said, and she'll have a look, and it may tell her she's going to deal with Tom and give him a shower. Now 6 months ago, he may have been ambulant. He may have been able to walk without any form of assistance, no walker, no stick. But in that time, he could have had a fall, or he could have just had a general overall health status deterioration, and now he has to use a walker. Now, if that care plan hadn't been updated to say mobility, a walker, she would actually allow him to walk freely, and the risk is that he could fall yet again. So it's very, very unsafe, it's unethical, it's unprofessional, and as an aged care facility, you can be quite severely sanctioned. So what does evaluation mean? Basically, it's just the ongoing process of determining the extent to which desired outcomes have been achieved. It determines how effective the client-centered interventions have been put into place to meet the holistic care needs of that client. It identifies and sees whether you're meeting needs, whether their new needs are arising, and if they're pitfalls, and you actually haven't. Was the initial evaluation done too quickly? Was one of the professionals not as thorough as they could have been in terms of their area of expertise? So it just picks things up. Generally, you would evaluate, there are 3 times when you would evaluate. You would evaluate if there was a sudden change in the resident's health. For example, they became ill, or they had a fall. Now, if they become ill, generally it's a temporary. If it's a terminal illness, we're not talking about palliative where they're actually going into the dying process, but if something happens and it's temporary, that would not affect the care plan. So you would address that situation independently. If they had a fall, and initially they could walk without any form of assistance, but as a result of the fall, they could have broken their ankle. So they would have undergone a period of rehabilitation, but as a result, the healing may not have got back to the point where it was before, and they may have to now use a walker. So they are walking again, but the need has changed. They now have to have assistance, so the care manager would then have to go and amend the care plan. So you can evaluate at any point. If the needs change and if something happens, you have to evaluate. You'd also evaluate if there was a gradual overall decline in their health status. It's not necessarily a sudden thing, but you can just see over a 2-month period something's happened and there's been a significant overall deterioration. And I'll give you an example. You have, for example, let's say George, he arrived a year ago into the aged care facility, and your care manager said to you, would you please monitor his showering process so we can see what his need is and how we can assist him. So you asked George to stand up, and you will escort him. He's able to walk. You will escort him to the bathroom. He's able to gather all his belongings. He's able to collect all his toiletries. He knows what he needs. He's cognitive. You escort him to the bathroom. He gets unchanged. He then goes and switches on the shower tap, and you just check that it's correct temperature. He jumps under the shower. You give him a washer, and he generally washes himself. So clearly he's able to organise his tasks. He is to a large extent able to shower himself on his own. So you would have fed this back to the care manager. A year later, you go and repeat the same thing, and you say, I'm going to escort you to the bathroom. However, now he's struggling to stand up. He's really struggling. It takes him a while. and he's very slow. He's not that steady on his feet. He goes to the bathroom, but he's forgotten. He's not brought anything with him, so you've got to go and gather everything and get all what he's going to wear. He goes to the bathroom. He does manage to undress. It's very slow and very arduous. He then stands there, so you've got to turn the shower on and regulate everything, ask him to climb in. You then give him the washer. He does nothing. You basically have to assist him. So clearly from that, as a carer, I would say he's absolutely one assist. He cannot organise his tasks. He cannot function in organising or planning anything anymore. In fact, as a carer, I would go so far as to say you don't shower him every day. It takes too long. It's too arduous and it's probably tiring him out. I would recommend that he be showered every second day, unless he really needs to. But they often aren't that active and they don't perspire, so it isn't always necessary, and it's not good for their skin integrity. Their skin's so thin and so frail, it dries. So my recommendation to the care manager would be, he's an alternate shower and he most definitely is a one assist because he cannot handle his task at all. So that's the second time that you would evaluate. And then the third time you would evaluate is in the formal situation, where it would be every 3 months, and it would include the dietitian reviewing the food and nutrition. It would involve each one of the professionals looking at their particular area on the care plan and just evaluating it. Okay, there are also other occasions when we evaluate, and as I said, the new admissions, all new admissions get evaluated. We also have what we call a management behaviour plan. And I'll give the example of the resident that had dementia and who tackled the carer, and she had to fill out the incident report. The incident report went to the care manager, and she will look at the situation of what happened. But one of the first things that she will do is she will load a behaviour management program onto the system. And this will probably run for about 2 weeks. And during that 2-week period, every carer on every shift will have to observe his behaviour, his level of aggression, his verbal aggression, and his resistance, which can also be a form of aggression, whether he's physical towards any member of staff, any resident, threatening, whether he is aggressive to any of the belongings, destructive, or to any of the residents' belongings. You know, does he go into the room? Does he grab things? So all of this will be monitored, and then from that, the care manager will glean. And this could be with dementia. They plateau, then the condition drops, and then it plateaus. Sometimes it can go up a little bit again, but often it plateaus. So from this, the care manager will be able to determine, is this a new stage, but it will be a constant stage, it will be permanent. And if it is, she will change the care plan, she will put strategies in place that we as carers will have to follow. But as I said earlier, at that point they'd also changed his medication. So it could have been, with the activity and the changes taking place in his brain, he could have normalised after 2 days. It could also have been that the carer needed more training. It could have been a personality issue and the carer needed to be moved for her own safety, or it could have been a trigger in the environment. Dementia residents don't cope with a lot of sensory overload. There could have been some activity that they held that morning and it was too much for him and he got agitated. But she will, in conjunction with the behaviour program management that we've actually completed, she will use that together with the incident report and just researching things. You also have a continence management program. Again, all new residents that are incontinent or partially incontinent will be assessed when they arrive. But what often happens is somebody can initially come in and they have good bladder and bowel control and they are continent, okay? But a year or whatever down the road, they could start losing those abilities, and you might notice in the morning that their beds are occasionally wet, or you might see them walking and you notice a wet patch on their bottom. Some of them tell you because they start getting embarrassed, others don't. What would happen is they would go onto a continence management program. So for the urine, it would be 3 days observing. For the feces, it would be 7 days. In that you would determine how often they need to be scheduled toileted to prevent it. You'd also work out how many pads they need and what strength of pad. You know, if they're only slightly incontinent, they don't need anything that's too heavy and absorbent. So they would determine what they would need as a result of that, and then the care plan, the care manager would change the care plan, and they would start receiving continence pads, and they would be scheduled toileted. You have a pain management program. We have a lady who's going into renal failure, so she gets quite a bit of backache. Initially, she was given paracetamol, and as the condition's deteriorating, the pain's deteriorating, she can be quite hunched. She was put on a pain management program. So again, it probably ran for 2 to 3 weeks. Every shift, every carer, every time she complained of pain, we had to record it. We had to record where the pain was and what she was doing that caused the pain, the strength of the pain, things that we could do. Could maybe resting, could maybe repositioning on the bed, could maybe massaging, could that help? So they'd analyse this for 3 weeks or 2 weeks, and then she would go on to a Schedule 8 pain patch, which is quite a lot stronger. But the care manager would need the information to determine what strength to put the resident on, and from that she'd make a decision, and then that would be adjusted in the care plan. So that gives you're monitoring and you're evaluating all the time. The care plan is your main engine, and all of these other little tools are used to assist and determine whether any change needs to take place in the care plan. Alright, the second point we're going to look at is how you respond to situations of risk.
You're halfway.
When a client has been given all the information on the risks, and the client still decides to go ahead with the decision to take that risk, this is called a dignity of risk. In the first section, I mentioned about the Charter of Rights, which said that we have to recognise that all residents have a right to be treated as individuals and to have their individuals' rights and preferences met as best we can. In the same way, that also includes a recognition of personal responsibility for his or her own actions, even when some of those actions involve an element of risk. For example, in our low care facility, we had a lady who, she was starting to develop dementia, and she'd had a couple of falls, and in their room most of them have lovely chairs, comfy chairs with TVs, and they all have their little ensuite bathroom. And she would stand up and go to her toilet and, potter around in her room, and she'd had a couple of falls. So the physiotherapist spoke to her and her family, and because she'd had a few too many, they'd suggested that she use a walker and a wheel and a walking stick. She agreed to that. The family were in full consent that happened. So she would be sitting in her chair, and the walker would be put in front of her. She'd have her stick there, and she would occasionally use the walker to go to the toilet, or she wouldn't. And as a result, she continued to have a couple of falls. Now, when you're close to 90 and you have falls, it impacts you physically. At one point, she'd actually hit her head when she landed, so she was severely bruised. And often they don't recover as easily. And when they have a few, it does have an impact long term. You don't realise, but it actually does. It affects their brain capacity. It just weakens them. It weakens their status. So I'll give you an example of the type of things that you have to look at, and just the way you have to engage them, and the way you have to actually negotiate. Because if this lady walked out of her room and she was walking around the lodge without any walker, emphatically we would say no. But in her room, it's her personal space. You can't sit there and watch whether every time she stands up from her chair, she will use a walker. It's too intrusive and it's too invasive. There's a fine line to how much we control. It's a smoker. You can tell them that it's could cause heart disease, it can cause lung disease, but at the end of the day, you can give them all the information, but at the end of the day, there's a dignity to their own choice as well. So again, this has to do with this lady, and I'll just give you some idea of the process that you go through when you actually deal with this situation. One of the clients fell and broke her leg while taking herself to the toilet in her adjoining bathroom, and it's not a long way away. They're very close, they're right next to each other. It's like having an ensuite. She'd been warned to ask for assistance and to ring her buzzer. They all have a little bell that's on a cord, and it's often next to their chair. Every time she needed to use the toilet, which she often fails to do. The risk is that the client may fall again because she drinks a fair amount of water, which is in her room, and she's constantly going to the toilet. She was given a stick and a wheeler walker to assist her. She has been warned of the risk to having another fall, but she does not always call for assistance. The walker and stick are placed next to her chair, right in front of her, where she spends much of her time sitting watching TV, in the hope that she'll take on board the risk and that she'll feel she has some dignity of choice, so she can choose one or the other. If she doesn't want to use the walker because some of them feel offended, she can use the stick. But short of doing that, there's very little you can do. As a carer, it is our occupational health and safety responsibility to maintain a safe environment. How you do it is you spot a risk. You then control that risk, and you then evaluate a risk. For example, we have one or two residents who can no longer walk or weight bear, but they sometimes forget and they still think they can, and they try and step out of the bed. Now the risk is they can fall out and they'll have another break. There are many things you can do. You can lower the bed to probably up to the knee, and you can put a sensory mat at the bottom. So if their leg does swing over, the sensory mat will go off and we'll come running. You can do that with those that are fairly sedate and don't do it that often. But we have another lady who's 102. She cannot walk or stand, but she crawls on her bottom like a little baby. You know, when they're first learning, my daughter actually learned to crawl on her bottom, and that's how and this is what she does. And she's fast. She is fast. She can come out of her room all the way down the hallway into the dining room before you know it. So you have to lower the bed. She's just too active. So the bed gets lowered to the ground. Because she's in and out quite often, you'd be in and out of her room switching off the buzzer if they used a sensory mat. So they use a mattress. Now, when she starts doing this, one of the first things you can do to try and control the environment is you would check the pad, because sometimes she's got a soiled pad and she's uncomfortable. She can't tell you, but you check. If it is soiled, you change it, and then you reposition her, and she tends to strip all her blankets. It's as though she's folding laundry. She had about 6 children, and she spends her days on her bed rearranging and folding all her sheets. So you get it all neat and tidy and all settled into bed. Sometimes that works. Sometimes, quite often, it doesn't. And she will climb out, and she will climb out, and you'll bring her back, and it'll keep happening. So sometimes what they do, but it's not done very often, is if you've got a resident that's trying to climb out, but they're not too active, you would put a rail up so they can't get out. But generally it's not used that often. It's seen as too much of a dehumanizing, restraining implementation to use, and also it can be quite dangerous, because if they get their arms caught or their feet, it can cause bad skin tears. So generally it's not used that often, but in the case of this lady, they use a chemical restraint, which is a form of sedative. So if it's happening constant, and sometimes it can, they would give her a sedative to try and calm her and relax her. Now, the tricky part here is at what point do you give her the sedative, because if she's too wound up, you give it too late, it doesn't help. And then she will be absolutely drowsy the next day, and it affects her eating patterns because she won't eat. So the trick is to give it to her at the right time, so you catch it, so it works for the night, but in the next day she's still able to engage and function and have her meals and be present with everybody. So this is an example. You recognize, you spot the risk, you recognize and you control the risk. With that lady, what we've also done is, because she crawls and because she's so old and her skin is so frail, they put stockings on just to protect, because crawling the way she does, she could cause a lot of skin tears because she's shuffling along the floor and their skin is incredibly thin. So to try and prevent skin tears, they put these thick stockings on. But what this dear lady does is, because she's always consumed with folding laundry, she'll take her stockings off and she'll sit on her bed and she'll fold them. Otherwise, when she's walking, when she's crawling, they start rolling down her legs. So it isn't really a safe, it works in part, but it isn't a full guarantee that she won't get skin tears. So I'll briefly give you an example of what it means of how a resident can put themselves at risk because of changes in conditions in them. Self-harm is one of the things that we have to watch, particularly with dementia in aged care facilities. We had a lady who, she was slightly dementia and she was in the low care facility because they had no room in the dementia for her at that present time. And she walked into the open plan kitchen and took a knife and said she was going to kill herself. So obviously we have to respond to that. So she was put on a behaviour management chart, monitored. All her words and everything were recorded so that if there was any potential, if she was going to put herself at risk, the psychiatrist could be notified. Whether this is an exaggeration, it's policy and you have to do it. All the sharp objects in the kitchen, in her room, all the scissors, nail files were removed from the dining room. And she had to be monitored until her medication from the psychiatrist had settled her and she was no longer speaking in that vein as much anymore. Another way is they could start losing their cognitive faculties. They could have a sensory loss, their vision deteriorates. And because they're losing their cognitive faculties, they actually cannot make decisions and they make very poor decisions. And for example, we have a lady in the dementia ward, and I think it must have been 2 weeks ago, she came up to me and she has a walker, the four-wheeled walker, and the walker has a little trolley in the centre with a leather lid, and they can just put their hairbrushes, their tissues and their little odds and ends that they want to put in there. And she came up to me and she said, "Oh, my hand tastes terrible." So I looked down and her lid was open on her wheelie walker. I looked down and she defecated all inside her trolley. Now this lady is losing so much cognitive impairment that she actually thought this was a toilet. Now she'd obviously sat down, and it's on a wheelie walker with 4 wheels. She could have actually had a serious fall and caused a serious break. She does things like she'll get out of bed, and in her room she has a big white fridge. Now all their bathrooms are white. She'll climb out of bed, she'll walk up to the fridge thinking it's the door to her bathroom. She'll turn around and she will just wee. Now she could slip on that urine and fall and break her legs. So she is very, very dangerous. And this is as a result of the dementia impairment that's taking place. Another one is self-neglect. We had one lady who refused to shower for 3 months. Now when they get to that age, they develop urinary tract infections so quickly, she runs a risk of getting sick. That same lady has also not washed her hair for 6 months. She refuses. She just sprays it. Anyway, they're characters. Other examples is just environmental issues like slippery floors, rooms that are too cluttered with furniture, sharp edges, poor lighting, poor heating, and cooling, because their temperatures, they feel the cold a lot more, they feel the heat a lot more. And then security, especially in the case of dementia. Your kitchens have to be locked, your fences have to be a good height, your laundry doors have to be locked. These are things you need to be careful of. The last area we're going to look at is documentation. So I'll briefly just hand you a couple of pieces of paper, and then we'll just go through this briefly. You can keep these because they're good reference points for you to look at, because you will be working with them once you get into the industry. So firstly, we'll look at a progress note, which is the top one in front of you, and this forms what we call exception reporting, and it records any changes in the client's condition during time intervals between the formal regular 3-month evaluations of the care plan. It's called exception because it's exception to the normal care that you give. It involves documenting anything that's unusual, that's different, or a concern you have about a client. So it's an exception to care. Because you have seen a change, you have to record it and you have to report it. Okay, it's your duty of care, you have to report it. So let's look. Normally, nowadays, most agencies, the progress notes, everything is on computer. In your nurse's station, you will have a computer, and where I now work is we actually would record it on the computer. You go in on your code, the date and the time would automatically be recorded. You never mention your name, you always keep it impersonal and professional. You never mention the resident's name, so it would be the carer or the resident. Some still use the handwritten progress note, which you have in front of you. You always write in black ink. In the first column, you would put the date and the time in 100 hours. In the comment column, the important thing to remember is that you start from one end and you go to the other end. You fill up the complete line, so that no one else can add things, because it is a legal document, and if there was ever a court case, this would go to court. So it's just to safeguard yourself, so that people can't put simple little words in, like not or whatever, that could change the whole meaning of something. At the end, you'd sign, you'd put your name, and then you'd put your designation, if you're ARN or if you're an RN. Okay, the next one, if you turn to the next one, is the handover sheet, and I covered that to some detail in session 1. This is what the RN, at the end of the night shift, she would go and update it, take things off that no longer apply, add things that have come on, that have occurred during that day. She would then hand this to the morning staff, who would then hand it over to the afternoon, who would then hand it over to the evening, and then at the end of the evening, that RN on duty would check and amend anything. Now let me give you an example of how it works. You've got Merle Campbell at the top. Can you see that? Her name, it's the resident. There she is. Okay, if you go down, I've highlighted, and it says doctor prescribed amoxil 500 milligrams. So she's been put on antibiotic. She's obviously been put on a short course of antibiotic. If you go down again to the next section, it says, and I've highlighted that, MSU, positive culture. She obviously has a urinary tract infection. So as carers, we've been made aware that she's on a short course of antibiotics. So when we give her her normal standard daily medication, which they do, they have this, often certain medications are exactly the same, and they have them 3 times a day. But this is an exception to what is normal, so we've been alerted to it on the handover sheet. Okay, turn the page, I think on the next page, you'll see Edmund Newell. I think I've highlighted that as well. Yeah, at the bottom, Edmund Newell. And if you look, it says, let me get there. I've highlighted it. The comment is, intake of fluid was 1640 mils. Need to be aware that only allowed between 1,000 and 1,000 mils daily intake. Edmund has renal failure. His legs are swelling quite significantly because he's not able to flush out fluids. He drinks a lot of coffee and a lot of tea, especially coffee. So he's been put on an ongoing fluid chart restriction. Everything he drinks is recorded during that day. The RN at the end of the afternoon shift calculates to make sure that it falls within the limit that he's been given. He obviously, when she calculated it, it was over the limit. So she's documented this in the handover just so that we're aware and that we keep within the restriction that we've been asked to do. So obviously it's probably not being followed as carefully as what it should. Let's turn the page and we'll come to Mavis' picture and then we'll look at Joyce Price. With Mavis' picture, you can see I've highlighted the care manager has made this note. She created this information and she said, and above it says, offer ensure drink if she doesn't eat her meals. And then above that you'll see it says dietitian. So this has probably been the 3-month formal evaluation, which has included a dietitian. They've probably looked at the progress notes and noted that she's generally losing her appetite. That there's probably comments that she didn't have this meal or she had hardly any of that meal. They will have looked at her weight chart. The dietitian would have looked at her weight chart and they will probably notice that she's declining in the 3 months. So what they've decided to do was, if she doesn't eat a meal, then you're to remove the meal and you're to offer her a nutrient supplement drink so that at least she's having something, so that in that way they can try and get her weight up again. Go down to Joyce Price. Now I'm quite familiar with that lady. Again, by the fact that it's the care manager that's actually created it and it involves a dietitian, I can only assume that it's the 3-month formal evaluation of the care plan. Again, they've said add Impricol, which is a supplement, to her cereal at breakfast. Now, I'm quite familiar with this lady. She tends to have a very good breakfast, but then she eats nothing the rest of the day. She's like a little bird. Her weight is declining. So when they've done the 3-month assessment, they've probably looked at the progress notes, okay, which I initially showed you, and read comments about her not eating. And they've probably noted that she has a good breakfast. So the dietitian said, well, let's add more supplement to the breakfast. So this is a new instruction that we've got to follow. We'll do one more. We'll go to the last page, and it said, and we see Eileen Wright. The care manager again has created this. Eileen is to return to bed for a rest after lunch. This could be a request from the family. There could have been notes made in the progress notes to say that she's very agitated and fidgety in the afternoon in her float chair, that she needs to go back to bed to have a sleep. So there could have been reasons for that, but we as carers, up until they may trial it, but up until it changes, we are to just follow that instruction. Okay, the last thing we'll look at is a care plan. Okay, your comprehensive formal care plan, the detailed care plan will be on the computer, and you have a computer in each of the nurses' station which you can sit down and look at and research thoroughly, which I recommend you do if you have a new resident, but you often don't have the time. So these summarised care plans are normally found in the client files in the nurses' station, and all you've got to do is quickly flip to them and you can read the information quite quickly. Now say I was asked to go and work in a house that I'm not really familiar with, and I know of the residents, but I don't really know a lot of their personal needs that well. I would go in and I would quickly scan these to pick up what I have to do or what I have to be aware of. So let's look at Percy. Okay, that's the one with all the handwritten one on. I'm about to feed breakfast. Now I don't know Percy, and I think, oh, does he drink out of a normal cup? Do I have to give him thickened fluids, or can he eat normal? Can he drink normal fluids? Can he have normal food? So I quickly flip this open. I go to the section that says diet and nutrition. I scan down the side. Okay, drinking. Oh, he can drink out of a normal cup. I'll go down a bit further to fluid, thin. He can drink normal fluids. I don't have to worry about giving him thickened fluid, and he has a normal diet. So he doesn't have semi-soft or pureed food. So that helps me. It's quick, and I can then get on with the job. Say about to shower a lady called Isabel. Now I know nothing about Isabel. I thought, oh, let me check. Can she shower herself? Does she need assistance? What type of mobility does she require? So I turn, now this is pictures, and this is very quick to scan. So I look down and I see, oh, AIDS, interesting. Oh, there's a highlight there. She wears hip protectors. Okay, so when I dress her, I've got to remember to put the hip protectors on. So she's obviously a fall risk. She's had a couple of falls. Now the hip protectors are that inside each of the hip, on this, it's like a corset, and it's just got a thick padding that goes on each side of the hip. Now I think to myself, she's obviously a fall risk because she wears hip protectors. So from that I can assume that she has some type of mobility assistance. So I go up to mobility at the top. I go across, and the wheelie walk has been highlighted. So I've got to make sure that she is always using her wheelie walker and that I don't catch her trying to walk on her own. So these are it just gives you quick access to information that you need to get on with your day. And that your agency staff that you sometimes have to employ would use this a lot. Okay. Okay, so how does everybody feel about this? We've covered 3 sections. We've looked at how you contribute to the ongoing relevance of the care plan. I've stressed that it's important that it's relevant, it's a legal requirement, and it's also our duty of care, that our information be accurate and safe. We spoke about how you handle the situations of risk, the fine line between putting safe measures in place but giving them the dignity of choice. And it comes with experience, and it's a very fine line. And then we looked at documentation. As time goes on, you'll work more and more with this. You'll work with the different management programs, and you'll become more familiar. You'll learn to use your instinct a lot more, and you'll learn to make decisions based on your experience and your instinct. So don't feel overwhelmed. You take all this documentation with you, and you will become a lot more comfortable with it. As I said earlier, I'm going to hand out a written assessment to be completed and returned to the office on Friday, the 24th. Over the weekend I'll mark it, and you will receive an answer from me either telephonically or by email the end of Wednesday, the 30th of May, to say whether you've received competency. You have to get 8 out of 10 to receive competency. What I will do now is just hand out a participation form. If you could just fill that in to give us feedback as to how the course went, so that we can make amendments if we need to for future ones. Thank you very much, ladies, for your time, and all the best in your new careers. Thank you.